Wait. I am Ann Choquette, CEO and owner of The List. I am so beyond overjoyed to have these two amazing humans here in this room talking to you today. Natalie Nixon is a creativity expert, and I pulled out, Natalie, your last book here, which was on my shelf, The Creativity Leap, Unleash Curiosity, Improvisation, and Intuition. Those are also some of my favorite words. And we are here to celebrate the launch. We've got 2 days of launch under her belt, 3 days of launch under her belt of Move, Think, Rest, redefining productivity and our relationship with time, which is amazing. I want to, I'm going to, you'll see me in the chat putting a link to buy this book and share this book with all of your friends and colleagues because this book deserves to be a New York Times bestseller. I am manifesting that from my seat here in New York City. And we have Dr. Angela Jackson with us, Win-Win Workplace, which I was also so overjoyed to be a part of the launch for this as well. This book did hit the New York Times bestseller list. And since then, since March, when we helped launch this at South by, Angela, I have seen you everywhere talking about the new terms of success, what it means to be successful in the world, and how do we build it in our workplaces for the people that work for us and for the people that we work for. So, with that introduction, I'm going to mute myself and take myself off spotlight and turn it over to Angela and Natalie to lead us through how we move, think, and rest.
And thank you so much. And just thank you for setting this table. Anne has a way and magic about her. And if you've not heard of the list, it really is women and non-binary folks who are supporting each other. And this is part of it. Natalie, when she asked me to moderate this conversation and I got a copy of the book, I have it here, I have it dog tagged, I have all of these post-it notes. I felt like I was just gifted, right, with a one-on-one session with you. And what comes through these pages is just right for this moment. You said something to me that I'm just going to read back a quote when we had a conversation a few weeks ago. You said, we're told that the future is technology, tech. But what you argue is that we're actually in a human revolution. And so today in our conversation, I just want to riff and just unpack with you what you mean by this new operating system for creativity that you call Move, Think, Rest, the motor program. And so would love for you just to come in and just talk to us a bit about this human revolution. Like what convinced you? What are you seeing? And what are like leadership implications of that?
Well, first of all, thank you again, Anne. And I just wanted to double check if we could be recording this, that would be awesome. I forgot to check in with you about that in advance. But meeting Dr. Angela Jackson is just one of the many perks of being a member of the list. I crazily, as Angela and I had a love fest in our initial conversation, I think we're both like, why haven't we met before? There's a lot of synchronicity in our type of beautiful brain. So thank you, Anne. Thank you very much, Angela, for spending some time to digest the work and to hosting this conversation. So the reason I wrote this book has been really multifold. As a creativity strategist, a lot of the focus of my work is to help leaders and teams build creativity as a strategic competency and to build creativity as a capacity for themselves as individuals, for their teams, and for their organizations. And the initial way I on-ramp people into that is to thinking about a very um, democratized and accessible way to think about creativity. Because as I was doing a lot of innovation consulting work in the early stages of building figure eight thinking, I was noticing that there weren't a lot of systems in place for that work to be sustained and for it to kind of stick. And so I also was observing that people were dying the slow death at work. And one of the first things I did was realize I think we're going about this in the wrong way. We actually should be starting with creativity. The challenge, of course, is that a lot of people don't self-identify as creative, especially if they're working in corporate environments. And we tend to think of creativity as only something that artists do. The truth, though, is that artists are exceptional at wrestling with the ambiguity of the creative process, but the best engineers and CFOs and executive assistants and farmers and teachers and plumbers and artists are super creative when they're toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems. And this theory that I developed, the wonder rigor theory, is really rooted in chaos theory. It's rooted in complex systems thinking. So fast forward to really building on that wonder rigor paradigm, and that's really embedded in the creativity leap. I had to reflect on my own personal moment of burnout, which happened when I was an academic. I was a professor for 16 years, and I was the founding director of a strategic design MBA program. And I hit a wall. I was doing my dream job, so it was incredibly perplexing because I was like, why is this not feeling aligned anymore? So that was actually that ability to pause, to reckon with in a very honest way what this misalignment was about, was my own personal data point about redefining work and productivity. I took that into the way I built figure eight thinking. So as a professor, as you know, Angela, there's a lot of opportunity to dip into professional development, personal development. And so I always have kept that promise to myself professionally as CEO of figure eight thinking. And even as I was doing a lot of consulting work, I would still hear on the sidelines people kind of confess to me they were kind of dying a slow death at work, that there was a lot of burnout to contend with. Now we couple that with ubiquitous technology and new rules for remote work. We're at this really kind of perfect inflection point to rethink how we have defined work. So the move, think, rest framework is one more on ramp to help people build creativity as a capacity, to help people toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems. And I'll just put a bow on this part of our conversation by just kind of giving people the bird's eye view of what the move, think, rest framework is. It really is an integrative, human centered operating system to help you flourish. It's not a sequential framework. I'm not advising that you move and that you think and that you rest. It's not siloed, it's very integrated. And think of movement in terms of movement hygiene. Think of thought in terms of the ability to backcast and forecast in order to sharpen your cognitive rational thinking processes. And think about rest in terms of what I call intermittent resting. So I'll pause there, but that's kind of the bird's eye view of how I
No, and
got
that
to
it's a
writing
great
this
place
book.
to pause. And when you talk about academia, just for all that are tuning in, I'm a professor at Harvard. I'm sitting here in my Harvard office right now. It's not as fancy as some might think. And I'm getting ready to run to a class after this, but you said something that I just like, underlined here. You said that you are trying to democratize creativity. And one thing I've been seeing in my research on the future of work and workplaces is that technology is supposed to make us more productive. But what I'm seeing now and my research is showing is that now there's been this shift where tech is actually running us, right? Instead of
Mhm.
it making us more productive. And so when you talk about the framework and the operating system of motor, can you talk about which gears are most helpful and most useful when you're thinking about one, being able to be creative and actually stopping this way of working now, tech driving us, that isn't productive.
Yeah, I think as with all ailments and problems in life, the first step is acknowledging there's a problem. So that's step number one, and just acknowledging that we have a tendency now to let the tech run us. I suspect in part that's because we're not quite getting this moment of technology quite right. We think we're in the middle of a technology revolution. In my view, we're actually in the middle of a human revolution. And the opportunity is to use the technology as a lever or lever, I don't know if I'm saying correctly, as leverage to amplify what makes us uniquely human. So for example, I love a great dictation app. I love Otter. It's actually the way I tend to write. I'm very
My favorite too.
oral.
Yes.
Yeah, and oral. I'll like do a brain dump of ideas, and then like it's for me, it's like putting together a quilt later. All these scraps of ideas that I'm piecing together. I love Evernote. I love the speed at which I can get tasks done, right? What we're not doing is then saying, so what? And then now what? And what I think we're missing is that because we have this addiction to busyness, we have a tendency to get into productivity theater. I've been guilty of that. I've bragged about how long I've stayed up and late I've stayed up to do XYZ. Does that necessarily lead to a better outcome? I don't know. Probably not. But because of the speed, we actually now have time for spaciousness. We actually now have time for eyeball to eyeball collaboration. We have time to think more critically and ask new and different sorts of questions based on this heap of distilled information that the algorithm has given us. So that is the reframe I'm hoping that we make, and that movement and thought and rest in the way I am unpacking it can help us to do, because so much of the neuroscience about creativity, about liminal space, really is tapping into the value of the default mode network capacity in the brain, which only happens when we tap out of the world, when we zoom out, so that when we return in a more uh, uh, dare I say, myopic, or sometimes better way to say it, focused way, things seem to click into place. Things seem to be a bit clearer, and the reframe is to ask ourselves, maybe instead of asking how might I be more productive this week, or how might my team be more productive this quarter, we ask a different question, a question such as, what might I cultivate this week? What might my team cultivate this quarter? And I really lean into that metaphor of cultivation in the book, because I am being very provocative in the book when I say I think we need to put productivity to bed. It's a relic of the first industrial revolution. It has an either or framework that is about speed, efficiency, output. I measure what I see, versus the cultivation metaphor, which was abundant during when most societies were agrarian based economies before the first industrial revolution. It's a both and model. It values both the solo practitioner and the collective. It values quick spurts of growth and slow. And it values, um, measuring what we can see, but also respecting that there's a lot that's percolating when things are dormant. So that cultivation model is really driven when we step into the motor move think rest framework and make time to move think and rest.
I really appreciate that. And one thing you talked about was the noticing aspect. And in doing this, I feel like in this book, you built almost an operating model how we should think about using this technology. We've been given all the tools, but no one's given us a model on how we could use them in a more sustainable fashion. How, if we're noticing things, how should we think about measuring what we're noticing? I'm seeing people put comments in chat, so people are like really feeling this right now. What should we be measuring? How should we know if we're doing it well or not? Like, what are some of those indicators?
So, as individuals, a lot of what the motor framework helps us to do is to get out of our head and into our body. We are by nature designed to be sentient beings. We are sense making organisms. Organizations are organisms because they are made up of humans, and therefore they're imperfect, they're inconsistent, right? So, the first uh, thing that we can be doing is through the noticing is to be able to be much more self-aware of how we're feeling. And as you know, Angela, when you write a book you learn so much. So I had a research assistant who did so much great secondary research. I interviewed almost 60 people for the book and doing my own primary qualitative research. And one of the things I learned about, I've always been fascinated by intuition. So Anne already referenced the subtitle and the creativity leap, and now there's all this research about the connections between intuition and strategic decision making. So when we get out of our head into our body, we are firing up something called interoception. An interoception is powered by the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in the body, extends from the brain down to the heart and the lungs into the gut. So, and it's a very complex nerve system and throughout our gut system. So when we say things like, my gut is telling me, it literally is. And I'll just briefly explain one cool experiment that was run to measure interoception. So interoception is that inner awareness that I feel cold, I feel tired, I feel hot, I feel safe, I feel calm, right? And that is fired and powered by the vagus nerve. So there was an experiment where people were asked to sit on a chair with their feet on the ground and their hands in their lap, and they were asked to tap on their lap, not through their pulse, the rhythm of their heartbeat. And some people were like, what are you talking about? I need to feel my pulse. And other people were like, okay. They sat still for a moment. They tapped out accurately the rhythm of their heartbeat. So the awareness is called interoceptive awareness, and how accurate you are is called interoceptive accuracy. And that was linked to another study that was done even years earlier called the Iowa gambling experiment, which looked at how gamblers, when they don't follow that nudge, that intuition, and how correct they are. But they linked that data set and the experiment with just the tapping on the lap, and they learned that people who have high interoceptive awareness and accuracy actually are really great at rational strategic decision making. And that study was music to my ears, because um, my intuition told me that if we are attuned internally, then we are better decision makers. So that's one reason, and a way we can be more aligned, is just to get quiet, to slow down. Any sort of activity where you are in the default mode. Now, for me, it's swimming laps or swimming open water swimming. It's learning some kind of dance choreography where I have to not just focus on the steps, but just to let go and feel. And that's always the correction I get. You're thinking too hard, Natalie. So it's a great practice for me to do. So that's for individuals. That's one example. For teams, one of the things that I advocate for and for organizations, is to look at KPIs, I'm not trying to add to anyone's life a new thing to do, but to integrate into what you're already doing. So I'm not saying don't measure market share and don't measure engaged client engagement, those sorts of KPIs. But I am saying, what if you also integrated KPIs that looked at innovation sprints and what were the results of those? Time for people to step out of their usual modes of work. What if you ran an experiment of what people brought to the table after sabbatical, right? Which is a different way to think about rest and intermittent resting. Um, and what if prototyping became much more a part of the culture of the organization, and you actually track the before and after of prototypes, right? So prototyping, sabbatical, innovation sprints, these are all things that actually invite us to play, that invite us to be more curious, to ask different sorts of questions, to get out from the office, away from the desk. And I want to make sure we also talk about play, but I've been talking a lot. So, but those are just two examples of, from the individual perspective and the team perspective, how we can start to be more aware of integrating the motor framework.
So I'm going to push here because, in my book, I actually advocate for people to add the KPIs and measure. When you think about us in business, we measure what really matters, right? I think I'm on a board. We're looking at sales on a daily basis, right? We're looking at quarterly reports. How do we prioritize this type of work and well-being to that level? And we're not saying a 10-point KPI, but what's one or two that a company can look at and actually measure and see what the difference is being made. And I just want to say, I took your advice earlier this week. I was sitting there at my desk and I had been sitting there for 5 hours straight. It's lunchtime. I was hungry and I was like, gosh, I should get up and go something to eat. And I was like, no, I can power through this. And then I thought our conversation came in my mind and was like, no, I could power through this, but should I? And for me, I just noted the time that I made a different decision because I think all of this is for us coming up with patterns on how we want to think and do things differently. And I think part of it is what you want to talk about next is play. How are we making time for play and not feeling guilty about it? So tell us what you mean by play and really what is your data? What did the research show you that adding elements of play in your day, how that impacted your overall performance and well-being?
Well, first, I just want to acknowledge your self-awareness. It is about pattern recognition. So much of intuition, another way to think about intuition is pattern recognition. And when we use the word decide, yes, we all have to decide for ourselves. If we're managing a team, the etymology of the word decide is de ciso, and ciso means, it comes from the word scissor, to cut. So when you are making a decision, you are cutting away from the past, and you are intentionally moving forward very differently. So that self-awareness for yourself is key. And if you're leading a team, awareness of, what are the feedback loops you have as a manager, as a leader, to be attuned to where your team is at, so that you're not just like pushing through in ways that don't make sense. So play is essential. One of the people I interviewed is Brendan Boyle, who is a toy and game designer. He teaches a course on play at Stanford D School. So went out to Stanford. I observed his class. We had a really long conversations and great interviews. Um, and Brendan defines play as engagement, which I love because it's not about having a ping pong table or a foosball or a dartboard on the wall. It's about engagement. And don't you want your employees to be engaged? Don't you want to feel engaged with your work? And the only way that happens is when we are at play. The opposite of play is boredom, right? So think as well about all the attributes of play. When we are at play, we have to actively listen. We become deeply and actively curious. We have to collaborate. We negotiate. Isn't that interesting? These are all the same words we say that we want in great leaders, that we say we want in great hires of people. We want people who are curious, actively listen, know how to collaborate, are open to negotiate, those sorts of things. That's what comes alive. And the other piece about play is that it tunes into the way we were actually designed to navigate this world as humans. We are designed to move, right? The spinal cord is an extension of the brain. When we are sitting at our desk for 5 hours straight, we are constricting blood flow to the brain, and therefore we're constricting oxygen, which means that ultimately we actually are not doing our best thinking and our best work. So when we are at play, the other big piece is that we are firing up the imagination. And that I end the book by I mean I'm sprinkling throughout the book my advocacy that we begin to understand we are in the middle of the imagination era. We're at the start of the imagination era. And because of AI and automation and robotics, that is our strategic advantage. It's human consciousness, it's curiosity, it's the imagination, it's the ability to dream, it's the ability to sense make, to discern, to intuit. And these things do not get operationalized, at least they don't for me when I'm sitting in front of the laptop. They get operationalized when I step away and when I'm a clumsy student of something, when I have an engaging conversation with someone, when I am at play in some way. And in a work environment, that can look like recess. So, a person who I interviewed for the Creativity Leap, her example still was really relevant here. I interviewed the CEO, founder of Nickelodeon, Geraldine Laybourne, and Jerry, when she was leading
I love
Nickelodeon,
Jerry.
yes, she's amazing. She's a powerhouse woman. Um, she inducted Recess, no agenda, just come on out and just hang out. And Brendan also is a big advocate of recess, and he talks about how when you were at recess, you know, the new hire could have a conversation with the SVP about something. And you can and as with all improvisational systems, there are boundaries, there are rules. So as Brendan said, you could have a rule that, no conversation longer than 3 minutes, right? And then you got to move on. So you don't hog up the person's time. But what sort of interesting serendipity that can come from talking about how did you make that tuna salad, right? Or why do you like that book so much? I interviewed Ivy Ross, who's the head of design at Google, and she does all sorts of great um, interventions to help people play, to help people tap out of work so that they can re-emerge much more focused and clear. She, for example, invites everyone when they first join to add to a library shelf that they have your favorite book when you were a child. Like, isn't that an incredible clue into a person's anatomy of geography of who they are, what makes them tick? Mine would be Nancy Drew, the
Yeah.
whole
And
series.
it's just a reminder, right, of like that day, just an anchor in the middle of your day.
Yeah.
We're gonna turn to the questions because I'm seeing a lot that are coming up. But before I do that, I think one thing I'd love to do with you for Game for It, I would love to just do a couple of quick fire questions because leaving this, I know everyone's going to buy the book and use it, but like you're a go-to person, right? You're our sage friend. So I'm just curious on rapid fire practical takeaways. What is one move that you rely on when you get stuck?
Oh gosh. I do dance breaks because I'm a lifelong dancer. So I have a playlist called My Happy Place on my Apple Music. So it's anyone from Beyonce to Donna Summer to Glass Animals that really get me to move. And that's something I do. That's something right in my office. If I have time, I have the privilege to work from a beautiful home office, and I have a 3 minute walk that I know. I have a walk that I know it takes 3 minutes. I have a walk that I know takes 7 minutes. So either a dance break or walking.
I love that. Okay, so going to rest, what is your go-to like rest micro habit in between meetings? Like a lot of us are, it used to be back-to-back hour meetings. Now they're back-to-back 30-minute meetings. I don't know if anyone's having those. What's your micro break habit go-to?
Daydream breaks. I am a mighty daydreamer. I have been since I was a child, and I just finally accepted it. And then it turns out the neuroscience talks about mind wandering, how important mind wandering is for all the juicy bits of productivity coming together. That's my terminology, not neuroscientist, but it's really different neural synapses that are firing up in different regions of the brain. And I take my phone and I set it for 90 seconds and I stand by a window.
And
I
just
just
daydream.
watch the clouds drift and yeah, just daydreaming.
It's so beautiful. And then my last one, thinking. What is your favorite thinking prompt? When you're trying to get the creative juices flowing, get your team going, and we don't want them to think, outside or inside. Like, what's that prompt that you use to get people motivated to think?
For myself, I like to go to doodling. People don't realize that doodling has nothing to do with your ability to draw. It is your capacity, it's a reflection of your capacity for abstract complex thinking. And the more you doodle, the better you'll get at abstract complex thinking. So I just take a bit and I just start to just do line wandering, really is what I'm doing. The other thing I do is question storming. And that's also something I do with teams. So question storming is a form of brainstorming that instead of asking for solutions, you have a topic. Maybe it's our marketing strategy for Q3. Maybe it's the holiday party, and the constraint that you give is you ask people in 90 seconds to just quietly to themselves jot down 5 what if questions around that topic. And then what you would do in a group setting is ask after the 90 seconds, you pair people off, maybe in 3 minutes it's to share. And then maybe in the last 5 minutes, you ask people, what was the one question that emerged that was really cool? And a lot of times what you'll discover is that there's a mashup of questions. And what this does is it democratizes thinking. It really does hone in that attitude. There's no stupid question. There really is not. And it's valuable to people who are more introverted because it allows everyone to quiet down and to not need an answer, but a what if question, which is very liberating. It's very freeing. I always feel my body relax when I get to ask what if questions.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I'm going to turn it over to the audience, but I just want to thank you again for your generosity. I mean, thinkers,
Thank you. Thank you
Katie
for these great
Couric,
questions.
Reese Books, Book Club. I just want to just say that you're just a brilliant mind and one that I'm just so happy to call a friend. So, well, let's open it
Thank
up.
you,
And
Angela.
I don't know if you want to moderate. I'm happy to take the questions from here. What you see.
Well, I have a question actually. So I'm going to use my host privilege and pop in. Um, I was thinking as you were talking from the very beginning when you set us up with the idea of the difference between a cultivation mindset and a productivity mindset. And that to me is a really provocative and hard shift to make for even for yourself, right? Even if we live in a productivity environment, the KPIs that Angela mentioned, but to make an internal shift that you're going to find new ways to think about that. However, even if we are thinking about collaboration and cultivation and thinking more broadly, what I am finding is just increasing distraction. And so like this, there are 3 times a day that I pick up my phone. I think, okay, I have to do something. And I pick up my phone and and 10 minutes later, I'm like, wait, what was the reason I picked up my phone in the first place? Like, what was, because there's windows and there are a million things pulling for my attention. Will you talk for a minute about distraction and attention in your framework?
Yeah, distraction is sometimes it can be healthy. Like I even reframe procrastination in this book because I realized, well, all humans tend to procrastinate. What's the reason for that? And I think sometimes it's to dwell, it's to be able to really engage in liminal space. So distraction is that kind of short-circuiting opposite of procrastination, but it's related, some kind of Venn diagram. But um, one of the remedies to distraction is is to work on developing new habits. So for me personally, one of the habits that I have been developing is when I go on those aforementioned 3-minute walks, 7-minute walks, is to not listen to a podcast, is to not even listen to music. It's to go on kind of a sound walk. So I listen to, oh, there's those are car brakes, birds, my own breathing. Oh, there's a plane above. And it becomes noticing versus distraction. And I think that wherever we can buffer in, instead of that kind of artificial buffer that these headphones end up producing, it allows us to be the sentient beings that we are, to sense make. Because I wonder, this is this really interesting experiment we're all going through right now, and I wonder if our intuitive senses are being diminished as we have these in our ears, and we are not as aware, and we're not smelling as much, and we're not we have this kind of artificial cocoon that we're created that has a place and purpose. But I wonder, how it could be a deterrent from the noticing, which is very, very different from distraction.
I love that you gave that example. I do walks too, and I intentionally try to take my headphones out. And going back to the measuring, I try to notice what did I hear differently today that maybe I haven't heard before? What am I seeing today? Even if it's the same walk, am I able to see something new? And I found like it just brings me back to being present in this moment, which is so hard when we might be walking and looking at our phones. I'm guilty of all of this. I'm talking about when I'm occasionally can get out, but like, how are we bringing ourselves back to this present moment versus this future casting, as you were saying?
You know what I think also, when we have the privilege and opportunity to travel,
Mhm.
we have to be so present. We have the child's gaze. We're okay to be naive and to ask clarifying questions, and to ask for help. And so I wrote an article a few years ago about micro retreats, and I share some of those examples in the book. You can put yourself in the role of that tourist in all sorts of cool ways. You can hack your way into that tourist noticing, being very observant mode. So one way is to go on a noticing walk. You can time it. You could be in a very different neighborhood. I live in Philly. Philly is a city of neighborhoods, and every neighborhood has something a little different, je ne sais quoi. And I'm sure wherever you are in the world, you have something similar. You can just by being in a different neighborhood that doesn't cost a lot of money. You could designate one morning next month from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. where you're going to dedicate to that. And what kind of new habits can you form? And the key in habit forming, as Charles Duhigg has documented so well, is that it needs a feedback loop and it needs some sort of reward. And the reward for me is always the sense of calm, the fresh thinking, the new idea that's now synchronized in my mind on a problem that I was stuck on. So there are ways that we can hack that. And the book gives you all sorts of practical tips and techniques.
So there was a question from Evelyn that I'm seeing here. Evelyn, do you want to come up and ask the question, or I can ask it for you if you're still
Yeah,
here?
we use these techniques in executive coaching all the time, and they're wonderful because we leaders need to be calm, composed, open, and imaginative, and creative. But listening to you today, you brought me so many insights on how we could take these massive organizational change initiatives that I'm coaching leaders through to build this into the process so that people aren't just exhausted by it and diminished by it. So I think there's tremendous power in you, and even the micro retreats, the question, although you had so many, building those into an organizational change. So we're not just battering people. Every executive should have his own toolkit of these for themselves, the gardens, the dancing, the Zumba, I don't know what it is. But how do we build that into organizations? Because I think your concepts are wonderful.
Yeah, so I did spend a lot of time thinking about that. So every chapter ends with, so first of all, thank you. Thank you for the positive feedback. That's music to my ears, especially because you are an
Cultivation. Yeah,
expert. Thank you. Um, so each chapter ends with reflection questions and exercises, not just for you as an individual, but for teams and
great.
for organizations. So one of the things that I learned in the process of researching and writing this book is this notion of emotional recovery. And I think this is really important when we're talking about executive leadership development, how we hire, how we recruit, how we retain talent. We spend a lot of time talking about mental fortitude, mental sharpness and clarity, that leaders need to be on it and be sharp, right? That's obviously really important, right? You don't want anyone who's asleep behind the wheel. You want a person who has subject matter expertise and is able to demonstrate that. And we spend a lot of time in executive leadership talking about and investing in physical health. You know, in the top companies, executives go to the Mayo Clinic and they get a full, run up, and that's really important for their performance. But the other thing that's really important for performance is emotional recovery. And I learned so much about the role of emotion by, diving into the work of Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett. She's written a great book called How Emotions Are Made, learning that emotions are not reactionary. Emotions are constructed, and emotions are in a lot of ways predictive of cognition. And leaders need the opportunity, the space, and the time to have emotional recovery, especially in these VUCA environments where there's so many layoffs, where as an individual, you might be seeing people being laid off. If you have to do the laying off, right, that is an emotional toll. So what I'm really leading up to is that by integrating this motor framework organizationally in terms of how we look at policy, how we're looking at KPIs, how we're looking at hiring and recruiting, we actually are admitting and deciding that creativity is a wellness play. Creativity is a
Mm,
wellness play, it's a productivity play, and it is essential for innovation. You actually are not going to innovate consistently and sustainably if you don't build in these speed bumps and these guardrails and these incentives to be more creative, because creativity is the engine for innovation. What's an innovation? It's an invention converted into scalable value, converted to financial value, social value, cultural value. An invention doesn't become a scaled innovation unless there is creativity that is integrated. Creativity is the converter to go from a one-off invention to an innovation. So for all those reasons, this is how um, I demonstrate in the book that you begin to embed these principles, you activate them, you operationalize them. And the big the way I talk about it is in terms of KPIs.
No,
thank you so much.
I love
You're
that.
welcome. Thank you.
Creativity as the converter, right? The unlock to all of these other outcomes we want to see. We have another question that came up, and Scott, this was more of a question or comment, but I'd love to bring you on. You were just talking about the neuroscience that you know behind what Natalie is proposing in the book.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Natalie. It's been a while. We met at the LinkedIn Learning Instructor event in New York City a few
Oh,
years ago.
cool. Hi, Scott.
Um,
Thanks for being here.
yeah, I'm happy to. I was intrigued by seeing some of your bits about the book on LinkedIn, and I'm even more intrigued now. So it's definitely in my future. Um,
Thank you.
yeah, my comment about neuroscience was related to your comments about play and about stepping back and the micro breaks and that sort of thing, because I'm not a neuroscientist. I don't pretend to be one, but it's kind of a hobby, if I can say that. I'm really intrigued by the things that our brain does for us and does to us. And so it is helping to reinforce the ideas of taking a step back to get the creative juices of the subconscious. That's one of the functions of the subconscious, is to process things that we don't want to deal with right now or shouldn't deal with right now. So it's an intriguing set of interrelationships between the brain, the vagus nerve, as you described, and emotions. So this is cool
Well,
stuff. I love it. Thank you.
I love how you just said the stuff that maybe we shouldn't be dealing with right now, right?
Hmm.
There is kind of this protective trigger that, I mean, our body is constantly signaling to us, you know, I'm getting cramped. I can't think about this. I'm not, this is not
Hmm.
clicking, but what do? We push through, right? Rather than listen and just step away. And guys, I'm not even talking about taking a 30-minute break, which sounds like such a luxury in most of our days. It is, right? Not even definitely not a 60-minute walk, but I'm talking about 3 minutes. I'm talking about if you
Hmm.
work in an office building, going up and down the stairs, just standing by natural sunlight, right? So that that sentient intelligence and those different neurosynapses that you are talking about, Scott, can really fall into place. I one of the quotes, the stats that Ivy Ross loves to reference is that um, our subconscious is filtering 95% of the data that we take in is in our
Hmm.
subconscious. Only 5% is at the conscious level. And
Right.
she threw out that step the first time when she was challenged by some bigwigs at, it was either at Mattel or at Google. She was really explaining to them that of her sort of the color story of a new product launch, they should go with blue. And they're like, well, where's the data behind that? And she said, the data is in my subconscious, right? And so she referenced that 95.5 data point. But what she also was really pointing out is that we need to expand the ways we think about data. We tend to only think about data on the quantitative level, right? And the
Hmm.
beauty of quantitative data and quantitative research is it shows us patterns, right? But quantitative data is only part of the story. It doesn't tell us why people behaved at the aggregation of data in point T51 versus point Z9, right? It doesn't explain why. We need the qualitative research to dive down and do the worm's eye view versus the bird's eye view to explain why. And then there's another dimension of data, I would argue, which is intuition. Stories are data too, which is where the qualitative research comes. It gives us the texture and the motivations behind people's decision. And then there is the internal data. You know, I really fell in love with the role of intuition and strategic decision making when I was a professor. I was leading this strategic design MBA program. We used to do things on Friday nights called Design and Dines, and we invite in leaders and entrepreneurial powerhouses to come speak to our graduate students. And there was always this moment in the origin story of these really successful people where they would say something like, something told me not to do the deal, or something told me to work with her and not him, even though her pedigree wasn't as sniffy. I started, what is that something? I think that something's intuition. And intuition is a type of pattern recognition. We don't touch intuition in business school, in medical school, in law school, yet every single successful person has has can credit their intuition at a certain crossroads, right?
Right.
So that the other thing I'll say, and I want to hear about other questions. The other thing, Scott, that I am intrigued by, Angela, is that we are at a moment of time in our zeitgeist where, yes, we are infatuated with technology. And I know we're always seeing on the news is AI and tech and robots and automation. Simultaneously, there is this emerging body of work about human consciousness and intuition and curiosity, the soft skills, which are
Hmm.
super hardcore in the future of work, right? So I'm very optimistic and hopeful because of that.
Scott, thank you for raising
Cool.
that. This was such a great exchange. we have time for one more, and I want to bring this in because I think a lot of what we're talking about are individual behaviors. And I think a lot of people we know, your experience, let's talk about the world of work, is who manages you, who is your leader, and what are they doing? And so I don't want to mispronounce your name. I think it's Garen. You put in just a comment on imagine if this was listed in a benefit package. I don't know if you want to say more about that.
Oh yeah, no, just as she was talking about it, just thinking the way people are compensated and they make decisions around employment, how expanding, it's the permission slip. It's a permission slip if it's in your benefits package, I guess. And is there anybody who's actually doing that? I'm like, I worked at Chiat back when Jay Chiat still owned it, and we had the paperless office in like the late 90s, and it was like a gift. There was an art collection and we had the paperless office, and that was way more important to me than what I got paid. And everyone who worked there I'm still friends with. It was like a weird high level cult of people who thought a certain way.
Yeah.
And I've been lucky enough to work in a few different places like that, and also then consult with and work with places that aren't like that. And I don't know, thinking that would be really interesting are you seeing people do it? And what do you think about that? If I ever build another organization that has employees, seems like it's an interesting thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, what my research showed is that this is happening within pockets of organizations. I didn't find an organization with the exception of organizations that give sabbaticals, as part of their policy. I didn't find organizations that have full out integrated these sorts of tenets and operations as part of how they're interviewing people, how they incentivize, how they review and promote, right? But there are some interesting examples here. So, for example, a lot of the big tech firms, some people I interview who work at nonprofits, and other companies have taken advantage of sabbatical. A lot of the tech companies give 5 years, give a sabbatical every 5 years. The challenge is that everyone takes advantage of that because it's not modeled enough. They don't see enough leaders doing it. They're still afraid that I'll get a slap on the wrist. But those people who I interview who did do it, who did take the sabbatical, what's so counterintuitive is their commitment to the company. You know, Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, his memoir, Let My People Go Surfing, he was way ahead of his time to have this macro management, macro leadership style versus micromanagement. When I interviewed Annie Dean from Atlassian, they are 100% remote company, and they spend a lot of time on redesigning meetings, right? So that's kind of getting to questioning, why does a meeting have to be 30 minutes? Why do we meet at this cadence? You know, meetings are the OG artifact that tell you a lot about organization. And then finally, Zapier is a company that I didn't interview anyone at Zapier, but just through the secondary research, they've had something called a get stuff done week. No, it was basically a week of meeting moratoriums, and all the research showed that things were actually slightly more productive during that week. So there's some interesting data points here and there.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Natalie, in the book that I wrote, my research, one of the strategies that we looked at is reimagining benefits
Nice.
for a sustainable and thriving workplace. And what we were able to see is that when companies were thinking about these alternative benefits, their workers were doing better. They had increased productivity. These companies had higher share prices. And it wasn't just a one size fits all benefit. The way that they thought about it was really centering the individual and what they may need. So there might be someone who plays the guitar, right? And that might be really important to them. And so if one of the benefits, they could have flexibility on that Thursday, so they could go and play their guitar, giving them that time. And it's almost like this creativity time to innovate, to do something that lightens them up. And so we're seeing some emerging research that this actually has a great impact on companies' bottom lines.
I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Well, I just want to thank you again, Natalie. This has been fabulous. We could talk for forever, and maybe one chance we'll get to do that in person. But I want to thank also everyone for joining us. I would be remiss in saying Natalie's book is out today. Please buy it on all platforms. I know we both have it. Mine is here. The second thing is she's got this 60 days of rest challenge. Natalie, if we want to support this, if we want to take this, what are 2 things that we can do just to support this movement that you are so graciously leading?
Well, thank you, Angela, for your and Ann, for your partnership, for your allyship and your encouragement. Please buy the book today. If you buy the book by tomorrow, September 6th, and you email me, we'll put the email in the chat, Natalie@figureightthinking.com. You will receive the motor cultivation workbook as my gift to you. You just need to send me proof of purchase that you ordered it by then. Please join the Wonder Rigor newsletter. You can go to figureightthinking.com, join the newsletter, and you'll keep abreast in that way of the upcoming 66-day motor challenge, which is going to be a fabulous way starting in October, just 5 to 10 minutes a day as a community start to put these principles into practice to form new habits. And just definitely stay in touch with me, but join the newsletter by going to figureightthinking.com. Buy the book today, and thank you so much for your engagement, your play, and and your curiosity about this work. Thank you very much.
Thank
you,
you.
Nat.
Thank you, Natalie, for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. You will all make it in time for your 2 p.m. meetings. Move, think, rest. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.